It is Friday, June 19th. Let's talk PlayStation. Okay, so E3 is finally wrapping up. A lot of good details coming out, a lot of great hands-on impressions of games and things like that. We won't go over everything, but we will go over some of the bigger news stories that came out of E3 after Sony covered up a few things about their conference and whatnot. Now, actually, one separate announcement that I'm surprised wasn't in the show and also wasn't saved for Paris Games Week is that the Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls remaster has been confirmed. Actually, Heavy Rain was surprising. Beyond Two Souls we knew for a while, kind of like rumors that was finally going to come to PS4, but both of these games are coming to PlayStation 4. Initially, the European PlayStation blog posted this, saying that it was only going to come to Europe and PAL territories, but Quantic Dream later confirmed that it is also coming to North America. No release window, but you can expect Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls to come to PlayStation 4, which is really cool because I actually prefer Heavy Rain though, so I'm glad to hear that that's coming over. Definitely try that game if you have not played that. Alright, moving on to some interview action. Sony Computer Entertainment Europe CEO Jim Ryan discussed a little bit about PlayStation Vita. It seems like this happens every year, and it's understandable. Sony's always having to defend themselves regarding PlayStation Vita and their support for it. But Sony had this to say in regards to Vita support and if they are stopping it. He said, "No, not at all. We're still selling respectable quantities. We have hundreds of games in development," and you might say, well, yeah, but they're all indies. But many of these games review very highly. Also, the PS4's remote play feature is something that is valued a lot. He went on to say, "There's no disputing that it's not the size it used to be," referring to the handheld market. It's a much smaller market than when the PSP and DS were in their glory days, but that market still does exist. And of course, it's absolutely true. The market definitely is not as big as it used to. Granted, 3DS is still doing respectably well in this market, but Vita is, of course, a much more niche device. Shuhei Yoshida also reconfirmed to us this past week that they are not going to be making AAA titles for the Vita. They said this a while back. He's saying it again here. Their developers are focused on PlayStation 4. Clearly, PS4 is going to make them a lot of money. You know, we're beating a dead horse when we talk about Vita. Sony does still support it. It's just not they just can't justify supporting it the way that everyone wants it to be supported, which would make it an unsustainable business. So when Sony announced Shenmue 3 Kickstarter at their E3 press conference, we didn't really know how much Sony was involved. It just seemed like, hey, they were giving the developers a place to actually show Shenmue 3 and see and kind of gauge interest. But the reality is that they were gauging interest in correlation with Sony for Sony to actually back Shenmue 3. So now it's confirmed that now that Shenmue 3 has pretty much, destroyed its Kickstarter goal, Sony is going to be officially helping and funding Shenmue 3. So that also pretty much tells us that this game is probably not going to come to Xbox One. And we were kind of hinted at that in the Kickstarter page where there was no mention of other platforms, no mention of it in stretch goals or anything. But now it's official. Sony is funding Shenmue 3 alongside the actual Kickstarter funding, which is good. They said that this is a third-party relations thing. We all know Sony has a third-party relations team. That's what Sony does with third-party developers to try and get games to come to PlayStation. They'll send developers dev kits. They'll try and work something out. They'll try and work out a deal to, maybe a developer can't afford dev kits for a certain game they want to fund or something. Maybe Sony will help fund their game. This is out of their third-party relations team, and this is great because not only did we get Shenmue 3 out of this, but they also discussed that there's a bunch of other games that they're looking at, which we all know. But hopefully we'll see more stuff come out of it. Hopefully more stuff that, we've been asking for years now. I mean, this E3 was great. We finally saw The Last Guardian again. We got a Final Fantasy VII Remake coming, and now we got Shenmue 3. So all these other games we've been asking for years could possibly happen. Or at the very least, you're thinking, please, let it happen. Speaking of Final Fantasy VII, a lot of details came out about this. So the game's director, Tetsuya Nomura, discussed a few things. One thing being that he wants to actually do remakes of Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI, discussing how that they've done remakes for pretty much every other Final Fantasy, and now they're doing 7, but they haven't done 5 and 6, and they'd like to do those. He also talked about the game's title. It's not going to be called Final Fantasy VII Remake. Rather, the whole point of that trailer was to just confirm to you all that it is in fact a remake of the game, but they will likely name it Final Fantasy VII, or it'd be interesting if they call it something entirely different, but I doubt that's going to be the case. But one interesting thing is that they are going to actually change certain elements of the game. They didn't actually go into detail about this, but they did say that when you're bringing Final Fantasy VII to PlayStation 4, in terms of the actual PC port, we all still need to remember that Steam PC port is coming to PlayStation 4. When you compare that to the actual fact of remaking the entire game, you don't want to have it so set in stone, the same game, sort of same scenario, everything's completely the same. So I would imagine this is kind of like a Ratchet and Clank PS4 situation, where they're essentially bringing the first game over, but a slight reimagining. I hope they don't change it too much or do too much to that game, because we all love it for what it actually is, so changing that would change the end result of us maybe not liking it as much as we want to. So clearly a few days ago we had a Ryan on Gaming topic about backwards compatibility and how Microsoft pretty much did a really awesome thing by adding that to the Xbox One via software emulation, and we discussed in that video about, you know, what's Sony gonna do? Are they gonna make a move? Are they gonna respond to it? And after they uploaded that video, like not even like an hour later or something, there was an interview. Sony finally like commented on this, and Shuhei Yoshida even commented on this himself, and Sony's basically saying no, they have no plans or commitment to actually do something like this, which in that actual video I told you Sony's probably not going to do anything. And the reason why they're not going to do anything is because they have PlayStation Now. And it's not like that's the whole like sort of cynical strategy of, oh, let's sell you the games that you already own. Like, no one's making you buy PlayStation Now, but rather that's their whole committed strategy. They've already invested so much money into PlayStation Now. People seem to forget that they bought Gaikai, which was a streaming company, for hundreds of millions of dollars. I forget how much they purchased it for. I think 280 million or something like that. But you don't just invest that kind of money and then just say, okay, well, now we gotta do backwards compatibility via software emulation, and thus give people a lot less of a reason to use the service that we put so much time and effort into. And Shuhei also went on to say that it's not going to be entirely easy for PS4 to do something like that, which is what I also mentioned in that video. Not to keep mentioning my own video, but you know, let the record show I did say these things a few days ago in terms of Sony on backwards compatibility. It's not going to be easy for Sony to do something like this on PlayStation 4, because PS3 games are based on the cell processor. I don't even think they could pull it off, essentially. And that's kind of what Sony's admitting to right now. Is like, well, we don't even know if we can do it. But they didn't flat out say they would never do it or they would never look into it. I mean, I think a more believable thing is for them to do PS1 and PS2 software emulation. That's a lot more believable. That's something they currently do on PlayStation 3 with PS1 Classics, PS2 Classics. Now, they certainly don't support this via disc, although the PS3 still has PS1 components inside of it to do hardware-based backwards compatibility for PlayStation 1. But you get the idea, right? It's a very disjointed, complicated situation. Backwards compatibility is not that simple. And that's basically what Sony's saying. It's not that simple, and we just are not going to invest the money into it, at least not now. And for the final news story I want to talk about with you guys, The Last Guardian. It's great that it's back, but now we got some more details now that the show's actually over and Sony's doing interviews and things. So we know a lot more about it, and a few of the questions I had about this game are now finally answered. Like, one of my questions was, why does this game look exactly the same still? And why did it take so long when it looks exactly the same? Well, we know the answer to both of those. The game officially moved from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4 in 2012, and it didn't move because it just made sense, right? Like, oh, PS4 is so close, why don't we just do it then? They moved it because PlayStation 3 wasn't cutting the cheddar, basically. They were running into a lot of technical issues developing the game, and it got to the point where if they wanted to make this game, they would have had to make a lot of sacrifices on the PlayStation 3 to get this game to be what they want, to actually release it, right? They said they would have had to cut certain characters and certain gameplay mechanics or something, or chop up the environment or something, but essentially they would have had to trim this game down to get it to work on PlayStation 3, and they were just having a lot of problems. So that's when, in 2012, there were, PS4 dev kits were finally starting to be ready to go, and they just said, let's just move it to PlayStation 4. And once they moved it to PlayStation 4, they had to obviously rebuild a lot of that game to get it to, you're basically starting not from scratch, but certainly you're moving it to an entire different platform. You got a whole lot of catching up to do. So that's good. I find that a little puzzling. I mean, obviously I'm not a developer, and I will never in any way, shape, or form be super cocky and act like I know everything, but I'm really surprised by that because the game doesn't look graphically intensive by any means. And when you look at the PlayStation 3, it was able to accomplish a lot of fantastic looking games, or a lot of insane open world games like Grand Theft Auto 5 or God of War 3 still looks amazing. But of course, I'm not a developer. I don't know what is going into that game. I don't know what they're trying to stuff into that game. I don't know the assets and how much memory it uses, and so I'm going to assume The Last Guardian is a lot larger of a game than we initially think it is to be. And they also discussed why it looks pretty much exactly the same, and that's actually Fumito Ueda's choice. This is the game he wants to create. This is how he wants it to look. He doesn't want to deviate from his original vision, and that's what what we saw is what it is. This is The Last Guardian. and they're still planning for 2016, and Shuhei commented that it does seem like they're definitely going to be on track for it, because the game is definitely running, it's playable, and a lot of journalists have actually gotten to play the game, which is something they could not have said how many years ago. Those are just some of the E3 news stories I want to talk about with you guys. So yeah, now that the dust is settled, great E3 this year. I mean, I think my favorite announcement, I was most blown away by backwards compatibility with X1. I was that blown away. I mean, I love games. I love the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake announced and all that shit. I love all that shit, right? But, you know, I've been doing this show for how long now, and I always talk about, like, the business side of games and how the industry operates and things, and that announcement blew me away more than anything else. Favorite game, like my game of the show, is probably Horizon. The more I'm looking at it, the more I'm blown away by it. I was super pumped about it when we heard all these rumors before, and it really does look super ambitious and just incredibly awesome. Just I have no doubt that Guerrilla Games can pull it off. It's just that, will they? And I really hope they do once we actually get to see more about the game. The one thing I'm most curious about, of course, is Media Molecule's Dreams. I'm a huge Media Molecule fan, and you guys all know I'm a sucker for games that are unique, that aren't the norm, that are a different idea, and so that game is totally, like, it's piquing my interest, man. Let me just put it that way. I really want to, like, see more of that game. By all means, tell me what you thought of the show and all that jazz. The Round 9 gaming topic, like I mentioned earlier, backwards compatibility. Microsoft announced it, so why didn't Sony? We kind of already discussed it here, but if you do want to see that, go check it out. And certainly be ready for a topic next week. Keep giving topics. This Monday, probably a video game teacher will go up. I don't know what game. I got a few of them already pre-recorded and pre-edited, so just it's easier and more convenient for me. So I don't know which one I'll upload, but if you guys are enjoying that series, definitely check it out, and we'll keep watching it and comment, because that's always nice, right? Anyway, that about does it for me. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you so much for talking with me. I'll see you guys next Friday.